Wilson und in meinem neuen Buch Mouth to Mouth geht es einen Unfall, wo ein Stürmer fast
Cut,
ertrinkt.
cut, cut,
What?
cut. Antoine, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. This
What?
is all my fault. The
Yeah?
show is actually not in German. I'm a native of
Oh.
Germany, of course, but the show is actually in English, Antoine. I'm sorry.
Oh. Okay. Well, I was prepared to speak
You,
exclusively in German about my new novel, which is written in English.
yeah. Did
I'll
you
just have to
study for two
translate.
days
I'll have to translate on the fly in in my own head.
in your own head? Oh my God, you prepared all the readings in German from your new novel, Mouth to Mouth, out from Avid Reader Press.
Yes.
Oh, I am so sorry. Es tut mir so leid. Uh,
What?
I'll make it up to you. Oh, I thought you speak fluent German. What is
Uh,
this? This is all
yeah.
just make. Does everybody just lie about their past now, Antoine? Is
I,
the foundational myth of our own genius just up for grabs?
I would say that it's not so much lying, but I think we're always in some form or another acting.
Hmm.
And that includes when we're being our most genuine. But it's a disturbing thought, and it can kind of creep in there. So you kind of wonder, even when you're being sincere, whether you're really capable of being 100% sincere.
This is really what your book. I mean, your book is about so many things, and we'll get into it. It's I loved it so much, and what the thought that occurred to me is, do we massage the truth or do we streamline the truth? And in what way is it to make our own life story more palatable and more interesting, like a screenwriter for a TV show? Is
Mm.
is that why we're doing it? Anyways, I'm getting ahead of myself,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think.
we can cover. Yeah, I mean, I think we do it because we naturally make stories, and we live by stories. But we also we like to think that we're good people, right? So sometimes we will modify our own past narratives, and not to mention that every time we remember, we kind of overwrite what we're remembering. So it's very easy to
Mhm.
become self-deluded about our own pasts.
If you're just tuning in here in Second Life or in on YouTube or Twitter, my name is Draxtor Dupre. This is the Second Life Book Club, and with me here is Antoine Wilson. His third novel, Mouth to Mouth, is just out yesterday from Avid Reader Press, and it's really amazing, Antoine, what you are able were able to squeeze into less than 200 pages. You actually sent me an email, something like, I did you a favor, Drax. I'm paraphrasing, wrote a short novel so you don't have to read that much for preparation. And I said something like, I like them door stoppers. I don't have a problem. But we'll also talk about like how you approach writing and that kind of sort of I don't know if I want to call it efficiency or whatever. But so
Yeah,
we're
I,
here.
I like to think of it as a dollhouse door stopper.
Oh,
It can the doors come in all different sizes.
I see.
Yeah.
That is very smart. Oh my God, we just lost 20 viewers on YouTube, probably because of my joke and not yours. But anyway, so we're here at the airport, um, and we're here at JFK.
hmm
Come with me, Antoine. We need to meet the crowd. They're anxiously waiting in the main room. And your book takes place at JFK, where two former high school acquaintances meet sort of randomly after 20 years. And the first person narrator is a writer, and he's I guess a struggling writer, and he listens to the life story of his high school pal, and it looks like the high school pal is doing really really well. He
yeah,
can
at
afford
college.
college. He can
Yeah.
afford first class and all that. And Jeff Cook is the name of his pal, and he talks about how he rescued a swimmer from drowning in Santa Monica, then finds out that the guy he rescued is a super rich art dealer, and he kind of stalks him a little bit, gets a job in his gallery, starts dating his daughter, and it goes from there. And the onion is peeled back slowly of like I said, I like the term foundational myth of this guy Jeff Cook, who is successful, and as you mentioned, as you alluded to, he likes to think of himself as a good person. There are several things that we're not going to spoil, where he does some very questionable things, that also then lead to his success. And the narrator, the writer, who is not doing very well, sort of forced to listen since his plane is delayed, and he relates the story to us, the reader. It's kind of like a meta narrative. Did
Yeah.
I get this kind of right? What would you need? What would you add to the basis of the story?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've covered it. He's basically this Jeff Cook guy who was sort of barely an acquaintance in college, but they'd crossed paths. Um, they haven't seen each other for almost 20 years, and Jeff pretty much buttonholes the narrator and shares with him the story of his rise to where he is today.
Hmm.
And it does begin with a rescue on the beach in Santa Monica. And he divulges that he's never told the story to anyone before,
Hmm.
which is baffling to the narrator. But it emerges why, I think, as the
But
book
Jeff
goes
Cook is
forward.
also, I mean, there's so much unreliability here going on. I mean, he might as well have told this to someone else, right? I mean, that's
Yeah.
pretty unclear. I mean, it's not really. I don't know if that's relevant, but just start asking so many questions as the story goes on about this guy, uh, Jeff Cook. And what is actually fascinating, there is a reveal at the end, which we're not going to reveal, which is easy to, in the age of the internet, which is fairly easy to verify. So I
Mm,
found that, again, I'm getting ahead of myself, but since we're on the subject, I found it fascinating that Jeff Cook, this very successful arts dealer, or well, he lives in that world, let's put it that way,
mm,
um, that he tells his writer pal something that is easy to verify that it's not true.
mm, mm-hmm.
Why do you
Well,
think he does that? Or does he think like, hey, the guy's not going to look on the internet?
well, I mean, the book takes place in 2010, slightly different internet, not so different from today. And yeah, I think he doesn't think um, that the narrator listener is going to go digging deep. And I'm not. I'm also not sure if it really matters to him that much, as long as in the moment he feels relieved of his own burden of
Hmm.
this story that he's come to tell. Because I think he has a lot of different motivations for telling the story. Um, some people have questioned whether maybe he's a sociopath or a psychopath of some kind, and that's you can read the book that way, 100%. Personally, it's my opinion that he's not. That in a lot of aspects, um, as he tells this story, this sort of self mythologizing self portrait, um, he's he believes he's being sincere.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And I think that's, you also alluded to that maybe we are all doing that in some sort of fashion, the self mythologizing, and then when we're in the moment, we seldomly think about, a possible somebody digging deeper and verifying that we're not really genuine, I guess.
Yeah, and I I have a sort of one pet thing that I love to think about and that I've done some reading about is uh, have you heard of the left brain interpreter?
No.
So this is something that came out of research by a guy named Michael Gazaniga and his team, and they're cognitive neuroscientists, I think, and they were working on split brain patients. I don't remember what years it was, but there are patients who had their corpus callosums severed, that connect the left and right brain, severed in surgery to prevent epileptic seizures from happening. There was a treatment for epilepsy, but they realized that they had an opportunity with these patients to study how the two different halves of the brain worked and what they would do independently from each other. And one of the sort of early studies they did was, they divide the visual field, and they'd show the right brain essentially the word walk,
Hmm.
and then the person would get up and walk, and then they would ask the person, why did you get up and walk? And the person would say, I don't know, I just wanted to go get a Coke.
Wow.
And yeah, so that left brain will come up with reasons for our actions, that and they only have to be plausible, right? They don't have to be necessarily true. And so I think to a larger extent than we'd like to admit, our actions are mm, they can be consistent with who we are, but they're not necessarily always willed by us or in our control. And then
Hmm.
after the fact, we do have a little, a little black box up there that generates the
Generates
reasons and the
the reason.
narratives.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I've always been interested in the kind of narratives that characters uh, generate about themselves. Both of my previous novels are first person narratives, and um, unreliability is one way to describe it. But other than that, I'm just interested in the way that language will sometimes attempt to take over um, uh, the narrative. Well, I guess
I
it's all.
pulled this quote from the book here. I put it on the slide behind us. To
Hmm,
put it bluntly, we never really know why we do what we do. The part of our brains tasked with generating reasons doesn't care about truth, only plausibility. And I
yeah,
think
so
that's Jeff
that's
Cook is saying that in the conversation, or is it Francis saying that? No, I forgot.
uh, no, I think it's Jeff, and it's in the actual dialogue scene. It's in JFK.
Hmm.
I'm pretty sure it's Jeff who says it, but I don't. In any case, yes, that you can see there the moment in which I decided my pet theory belonged in the novel. I had it take up a bunch of space, and then I cut it and pared it back to that sentence.
Aha. Okay, so this is how the sausage is made. This is always
Oh,
very
you don't even
interesting.
want to know how the sausage is made.
Actually, I do, and I'll ask you a few questions. But first of all, you've done, and we'll get into the book. We'll start with a reading very very soon. So, audience, be patient. Let me say welcome to Kitten Duel on the YouTube stream, and a bunch of people on Twitter. And I will monitor the chat there as well. If you have questions and comments, please put it in there. I just looked up the left brain interpreter. Those uh, um, experiments were done in the 70s. Now, before we keep talking about the book, I'm curious, Antoine, you've been on a virtual and physical book tour. Of course, your
Yep.
publisher calls it virtual. We call it video chat, because I'm sure they didn't have a an airport lounge to sit with tiki beer.
Yes. No,
Um,
it's not really like this.
exactly. Boom. But do you enjoy these tours? I mean, they're very sort of compressed, obviously, when a book comes out, and you do a lot of them. Is it enjoyable, or is it a little bit anxiety inducing? Is it annoying when people ask the same questions when they get the same sheet, or you feel that they haven't even read the work? Um, Charles Yu was here, and he was on the Daily Show, which he enjoyed. But Charles Yu, and I always very proud of it. He said he enjoyed our conversation more. You know,
Hmm.
nothing against the Daily Show, but of course Trevor Noah can't read a book per day, so he had his producers reading, and it was a good conversation. It was a short one. So how about these kind of compressed tours that happen? Like you're done with the book, and all of a sudden you do like, I don't know, one
Right.
per day or something.
Yeah. I don't. I would say in terms of something like the Daily Show, that's a tightly packaged opportunity to essentially sell the book, right?
Hmm.
So and bring up one or two issues or topics that come up in the book. It's quite different from a conversation like this, or even some bookstore conversations. If I've got somebody that I'm talking with who is interested in digging deeper, but I really, yeah, I really enjoy doing these kind of events, and I would say the core of it is I least enjoy it when it's about selling the book. Um, because in just I don't feel like I'm a very good salesman per se. I most enjoy it when I get to talk to somebody who has read the book, and the reason is I'm the only person really who can't read the book as a reader.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so one of the great pleasures of putting a book into the world is getting to hear back from people what they got out of it.
Mm.
So like I've always enjoyed book clubs more
Mhm.
than going into bookstores and doing readings because you get to hear. And I love it when somebody some cranky person is like, well, I didn't think that at all, and or like out of left field. And that's the most exciting thing for me. And in this book I've tried to there are certain things that I'm undecided about when it comes to the characters and their motivations and things, and I just let it be that way because I wanted to leave room for the reader to also experience that and come to their own ideas about these characters and what they're up to, but not do so in a way that's um, too open. As
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
like to when I'm teaching writing, I like to say that a story, the end of a story especially, should invite um, interpretation, but not speculation. Like you shouldn't be
Ah.
wondering what the heck actually happened, right? You
Mhm.
don't that's not what you want your reader to be wondering. But what does it mean, or what was this character thinking? That I like to leave open.
The book resonated with me in many ways. One of them, it's set in LA. I lived in LA. It was very formative years for me. Met my wife there. Worked at KPFK at the radio station. People know the story, but it was really sort of the setting. Also, the protagonist also was house sitting for a famous actor. I don't know if we should give it away because there's a hilarious line in there,
Hmm.
but the
I can tell you who inspired it. This
okay,
was it was a
but
real detail from somebody in the '90s, and that actor was and and I proceed to forget his name. He's from Grey's Anatomy and
ah.
Patrick Dempsey. That's who it is. Patrick Dempsey.
We
That was
have
the
a very
real.
slow audience today. I would have imagined that they put out Patrick Dempsey. But the guy is not only house is not house sit. The protagonist is not house sitting for the actor. He's house sitting for the house sitter, and then
Yeah,
he's sort of the second house sitter in command.
right.
This
Because
is
the actor is working. The owner is working off in New Orleans or London or someplace, and then the primary house sitter is yeah, he's off. He got a gig, at the last second. So then um, now now Jeff's the house sitter. Nested house sitting. Somebody put into the chat. That's
I
like
see.
nested narrators. That's perfect.
Yeah, yeah, it's totally meta, Antoine. You're so like on the money with this book. I mean, the timing could not have been better. It's meta in so many ways. I just wanted to say that I also was house sitting once with two other friends for somebody who is connected to the actor who is referenced in your book.
Wow.
We house sat for the cinematographer Claudio Miranda. Now, if people want to dig and look up Claudio Miranda and see what the first big movie was he was working on, then you will find the actor that is referenced in Mouth to Mouth. But you could also pick up Mouth to Mouth just out yesterday from Avid Reader Press and then read for yourself. Now that's
Or
see how what a
you
good salesperson I am. Yes, Antoine?
that's beautiful. Or you can download the audiobook, as I saw somebody else in the chat put on. And I have a story about the audiobook, a brief
Please.
story, if you'll
Yes.
indulge me. Um, Back in 2000 or so, I wrote so I worked for a fine art appraiser in Beverly Hills in the '90s and in the early
Ah, so
2000s.
there's a lot of
Yeah,
connections.
we
Okay.
can we can get into that, but I wanted to write a story about the art world, so I did write a short story back then about an artist and the sort of hoops he has to jump through dealing with this generous patron. But uh, that story ended up in a anthology called Best New American Voices, and then was adapted into a short film by a director named John Dolan. And John cast a young, wonderful actor named Eduardo Ballerini as the lead actor in that short film. Then, 20 years later, Eduardo Ballerini now the king of audiobooks. There's a
Hmm.
massive New York Times profile of him saying, calling him, he's the voice of Nausgard and the voice of God. Eduardo is the narrator of Mouth to Mouth on the audiobook. So
Unbelievable.
full circle. Yeah, it was really great to work with him again.
I have to look up these names. So this is also full circle. This is
Mm,
everything is full circle. It's also full circle that a Marillion poster is here in the lobby. Maybe the
amazing.
camera can zoom over this little detail. Big shout out to Ruby. And the full circle is, of course, um, you know what? This is an inside baseball because I know people haven't read the book, but I'm curious. Do you think that Jeff Cook has orchestrated this meeting with the narrator? The first person narrator, the writer. Is this a possibility? Have
You
you
mean
been asked that question? Like that
at
he bumps
JFK?
into him at JFK somehow?
No.
Because hear me out because
Mhm.
Jeff is does a lot of unsavory stalker adjacent things, you know.
True. I mean, I guess, could be an outside possibility, but in my mind, it's a coincidence, and it's something that genuinely sparks memories in Jeff's mind that get him talking. I think that the sort of the engine that kicks off his storytelling comes from a real place. But also, but I don't see him as a sociopath or psychopath. I think
Yeah, neither
once,
do I. I mean, it's I don't even find him stalking adjacent. I find it completely plausible that when he rescues the swimmer, he wants to find out who he is, and when he gets his name and when he understands where he works, that
yeah.
he seeks him out, and that he sort of I would do the exact same thing, and I don't consider myself a sociopath, and
Well,
it's
I'm
just
glad you're over there in Germany.
Antoine, you don't know where I am. I'm in Second Life.
Oh,
Look
that's a good
outside
point.
your house.
Good
Look
point.
outside the window.
Yeah. I just see a tree that's moving strangely across the yard.
I bought a plastic tree at Home Depot, and I'm inside of it.
It's got cables running out of it.
One of the funny lines in the book here, I put it on the slide. It says, "I can't imagine writing a book," says Jeff Cook, and then the narrator, who is a writer, says, "Neither can I."
Mm.
Is that
Yeah, that's
something from you, directly from your soul, from inside your?
100%. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a self quote. I've had, people, when you write a novel, people sometimes say to you, "I can't imagine writing a novel," and my genuine response to it is, "Neither can I." It's and I used to. I think before I wrote a novel, I was able to imagine it, but now, yeah, no, it's just something I do, and then it's there are parts of the process that I don't know. Maybe I just have a really bad memory, but uh, once it's done and I'm on the other side of it, it's hard to imagine attempting
that
such
you
a thing.
that you Speaking about memory, I have a note here in my run sheet because I find this fascinating. I need your honest opinion. I know you're
Mm,
not a doctor, but I really love your books. I read all of them and I recommend them. I love The Interloper. I love Panorama City. I read the German translation, which I thought was very good. Ein Mann von Welt. Now, when you then in preparation for the show, I realized that me being the super fan, self-professed super fan, I uh, did not remember major plot points at all from both these novels. I only remembered a very, very deep feeling of satisfaction, of being moved in different ways.
mm,
So, is that something that you experience as a reader as well, where something sticks with you just as a feeling? And as a musician, I could sit down and I could write a piano piece that evokes this feeling that I had when I read Panorama City, but I couldn't tell you uh, some of the major plot points. Now, I took the book out of the shelf, I flipped through it, and then it came back to me.
hmm
But and Shyla, our researcher, I had a conversation with her prior to the show, and she said, "Well, you know what?" I said, "Like Shyla, do I have early onset dementia? What's going on?" And she said, "Well, maybe you do. So I don't know.
Well,
But is that something that the audience can relate to? That you have a very, very strong feeling about a book and you remember what it did with you, but you cannot recount big plot points.
Yeah. It's in. I read somewhere sometime. See, I remember anything, but
You
V.S.
don't even remember where
Yeah,
you read that.
yeah, but V.S. Naipaul was talking about writing, and he mentioned that the reader has amnesia, and that's something it's very important to remember, especially in a longer book. And it doesn't mean you need to repeat things per se,
Hmm.
but you just need to be aware that not everything sticks. I find that after I've closed a book, it's definitely the feeling remains, the memory of the emotion and images.
Hmm.
It depends.
Exactly.
Yeah, it depends on the book. Sometimes, I mean, if there's a big plot turn or something, maybe, but in general, it's eh, the emotion, and it's connected to the language, the way the writer uses language for me. But that may be just because I'm a writer. I I'm always reading. The analogy is to music. When a musician listens to music, they can hear the notes or the structures in a
Yeah.
way that is analytic, in addition to just appreciating it. Whereas I'm not trained in music. I'm like strictly shorthand, right brain. When I listen to music, it's all just colors and shapes. But so I remember language, and I read, through that sort of dual lens of the emotional and um, the analytical. But not too long ago, I, I was remembering the film adaptation of uh, James Baldwin's novel Giovanni's Room,
Hmm.
and I was just thinking, God, that was so good, and I wonder who made it. And I looked it up, and I realized there was no film adaptation of Giovanni's Room.
Oh my
Um,
God.
yeah,
Dude, I
and
was just saying like what. Because
right,
this is
so
impossible that that I have missed that. I was like, oh my God, can I admit to Antoine that I don't know that there is no that there is one? And okay,
right.
no, go ahead.
So, but yeah, so and then I looked, and it was a year earlier that I had read the book, and some of the visual imagery in that book was strong enough that I remembered it as if it was a film uh, adaptation, which is very interesting, and not many writers have that effect on me.
But you were also just mentioning something with the analytical mind. When I said I don't remember the plot points, but you then mentioned, okay, the reader does not, the reader has amnesia. And so for you as a craftsman, what does that mean? Does that mean you have to be cognizant to maybe remind the reader of a certain constellation between characters? Is that now intuitive? Are you at a point in your craft where you can do that, or do you have like little post-it notes that remind you? Because like I said earlier, I'm really impressed that you have such a it's a very short book. It's 180 something pages, but there is so much stuff in there, and there is some complexity with the constellation. It's like a small, I don't know, maybe a family drama rather than the Thomas Mann, the Buddenbrocks, which you could
Mhm.
have also written, I guess. It could have been very expansive. Um, but yeah.
Yeah, the it's a combination of intuition and then intellect. So the intuition being in the drafting phase, and the intellect coming in the revision phase. The the two are not divided with a bulkhead or anything, but at least in the beginning, I find when I'm trying to find the story and put things together, the I'll return to material that I've put down on paper already. You sort of start to create the world, and then something that you've mentioned, you think, oh, I can use that again, or they
Hmm.
can return to that place. And when I teach like writing of short stories, I always say, if you can make a story have some kind of internal reference within it, um, sort of you mention a place at one point in a story, and they return to that place later in the story, or something like that.
Hmm.
It sort of 3Ds the world of the story. So I just end up picking up stuff that I've set down and using it again, or putting into motion. So that I think that's how I probably address the amnesia question is things come back up. A specific example in this book that was way off in the intellect zone because it was in a very late draft is there's a scene with Jeff and the art dealer's daughter in the sort of uh, the house under remodeling in Mandeville Canyon, and they go down into the basement, which is under construction, and there's a movie theater being built down there and stuff like that. That scene was originally set on the lawn in the house that Jeff is house sitting in, and it was fine. But I was like, I feel like I want to return to the Mandeville house, and
Hmm.
so there's an example of something that where the image of the Mandeville house, which then is in the end, there's a little reference to it again. It just gets picked back up rather than having sort of a neutral location of that lawn that was not as meaningful.
The thing with like being repetitive or being too on the nose with stuff when you're feeling insecure about how much does the reader need to be reminded of certain
Mm.
things, is that a
Hmm.
process that an editor helps you? I mean, I ask that question almost every week because I want to get a little bit into like what that relationship is, or is that a bunch of test readers or whatever you call them that come
Hmm.
in and they go like, dude, you're mentioning this thing like three times, we're not that dumb.
Yeah. Um, I would say probably intuitively, I don't do that as much as I used to. When I was a younger writer, uh, before even going to my first sort of uh, UCLA extension workshop class, my early stuff definitely didn't leave a lot of room for the reader. I made sure that every point that I wanted to make was explicit,
Hmm.
and so
That's
now
a
I think
sign
I
of somebody who is a little bit insecure still,
yeah,
I
or
guess.
just I just didn't quite I mean, I was a reader, but I didn't quite understand the the reading experience,
Hmm. Hmm.
and how it really worked.
Hmm.
But in terms of the editing process, all kinds of different things come up with first readers and with with my editor, all kinds of queries and questions, and uh, it hasn't really come up much about repeating things too much. But one I love this term from screenwriting or television writing where people talk about hanging a lantern on something, you know, and
Oh,
and sometimes if a detail isn't quite popping, so to speak, you
right.
can hang a lantern on it and
Oh,
make the audience very aware of it because it'll show up later. You see it in like corny mass market movies where they stay on something a little too long, and
yeah,
if you're a savvy viewer, you're like, okay, that's coming into play later.
yeah.
Yeah,
Now
yeah.
that's interesting. You mentioned Shyla, who does research. She found out that because you were mentioning when you were just starting out, it came to my attention through our researcher Shyla that you actually have a first novel somewhere in the drawer. And I would be remiss not to mention that my favorite novel is Roberto Bolaño's The Third Reich, which was
Mm.
found posthumously in his drawer.
Mm.
Antoine, why do you still have this novel in the drawer? Do you plan on after you're leaving this planet that it would be um, found, or do you feel because that's interesting? I mean, you could throw it away.
You've just motivated me to delete the files.
No, don't do it.
I mean, the see Bolaño's first book, which I have not read.
It's
He
so
was
good.
if I remember, he was a poet before he
Mhm.
was. Yeah, so there you got a guy who's really tuned into language, and how it works, and he's coming at it from who knows what perspective. But I would just say my road to learning about writing was mm, mm, long and
Long and
bumpy.
bumpy,
Thank you.
says
Yeah.
Sherman. Yeah.
Well, and that first, but what happened was I came out of grad school. I had a year-long fellowship that I could spend writing, and I spent that year and the next 2 years working on this um, big novel. And the way I look at it, looking back, is I took everything that I had learned and used it in service of the story I was telling.
Hmm.
And as a result, I mean, some of it is really wonderful, but it it isn't quite the book that I'd want to read. And so when I went to work on the Interloper after that, I decided, I'm going to forget everything that I know, so to speak. And this is going to be a tightrope walk. I'm just going to go straight out on the tightrope and improvise this thing, at least the first draft of it, and with this concept in mind that's kicked it off. And I've kind of worked that way ever since. Um,
Hmm.
and so the first one maybe had some whiff of not quite an academic exercise, but maybe a student work.
Hmm. Hmm.
So it's probably not as good as Bolaño's Third Reich. I mean, it's definitely not.
Well, it's going to be in the Antoine Wilson Museum for sure because people love to see where a fully
Museum.
formed artist comes from.
There's no museum. There, I've got bad news for you, Drax. Posterity is full. There are too many people. Too many people writing too many books. Too many things being stored and recorded. Posterity is completely full. There's going to be
It is
no
so
Antoine
funny,
Wilson Museum.
Antoine, that because before I read your book, I was reading Kurt Vonnegut's Timequake that
Hmm.
he wrote in 1997, and it's sort of a meditation on life and him and posterity and whatnot. And I want to read you this quote, and then I want to ask you. And it is what you're talking about is so related to this Kurt Vonnegut book, which is incredibly weird.
Oh,
There's a
I've never
time
read it.
quake. Yeah, it's 1997, and he talks a lot about himself. Then of course he talks about his alter ego Kilgore Trout. If
Mm-hmm.
people don't know who Kurt Vonnegut is, I can't help you. You need to Google. You need to log off this Second Life right now. Google him. Actually, no, don't do it afterwards. But
Open another tab.
and Kurt Vonnegut was actually in Second Life shortly before he passed away.
Oh.
In 2006, a guy out of Boston did a talk with artist Suzanne Vega was in and Kurt Vonnegut and a bunch of others, and it's on YouTube somewhere. But this is from Timequake here. Tellers of stories with ink on paper, not that they matter anymore, have been either swoopers or bashers. Swoopers write a story quickly, higgly piggly, crinkum crankum, any which way. Then they go over it again painstakingly, fixing everything that is just plain awful or doesn't work. Bashers go one sentence at a time, getting it exactly right before they go on to the next one. When they're done, they're done. Antoine,
Hmm.
are you a swooper or a basher?
I've heard it also as what's the pantsers and
Pantser and
planners?
plotter.
Plotter, yeah. I'm a swooper for the most part. Uh, I think Zadie Smith wrote an essay about her process. Maybe it was called The First 20 Pages or something. And she talked about how she will write and rewrite from the start until she's got her first 20 pages right. And
Hmm.
that is definitely my process. Um, and this book, the amount of time and drafts that went into it is really belied by its short length. There are full drafts of this versions of this book that, um, yeah, we can put them in the museum.
This is fascinating. I mean, you take, or do you feel pressure in terms of output? I mean, there's
Yeah.
people who put out a lot of stuff. You have three novels out, uh, sort of roughly every 5 years. I wanted to save this joke for the end when I sign off and said, Antoine, see you in 5 years. But is that something that you're kind of cool about, or that sometimes you wake up sweating, go like, damn, David Baldacci already wrote 5 books, and they're all at the airport. Speaking of
Right.
the airport.
Right. No, I don't think about it in terms of other writers. I have some close friends who way more put out books more quickly than I do, quite a bit. One every 2 years kind of thing. And then other friends who are slower, but I don't really compare. myself to them. I just have my own internal cat o' nine tails whipping me about my productivity.
Hmm.
The gap between Panorama City and this book is fairly long, and I think it had as much to do with uh, parenting,
Yeah.
having two children, and it, it slowed me down. Um, all kinds of sort of life things slowed me down, but I hope that the next one isn't so long in coming.
Baragon Bet says here in the local chat, I hope the Ransom Center at University of Texas gets Antoine's paper. It's sort of a book museum. All
Hmm.
right, we'll give him a call. Okay, now we need to read something. Jesus, it's
Okay.
long into conversation, wonderful conversation, and people go like, we need to hear the prose. If this Antoine guy is actually as good as Drax keeps saying.
Yeah.
So the book stand magically comes out, and I think we're going to read something from the beginning or from
Well,
what are we reading?
why don't we go? I was going to read from the very beginning, but
Maybe
we could
from the
just
rescue,
we
huh?
can just skip that. Let's skip that one. We'll
Yeah,
just
let's
do the
skip.
rescue. Um, and a little bit of framing here. So
Yeah, please do. Yeah.
yeah, what happens in the book is that there's this conversation going on between Jeff and the narrator, and so part of the story that Jeff tells is in direct dialogue while they're sitting there at JFK having drinks, having some hors d'oeuvres they've taken from the the first class lounge food area, and then but then the book slips into um, the action of Jeff's story in a close third person mode. So this section will reads as a close third person mode, and then I think at the very let's just take a look. Yeah, I think this will just be the close third person section. The next one I'll mix it up a little. So Jeff is on. Jeff is heartbroken.
He
His
broke up with
girlfriend.
his girlfriend. Yeah.
Yeah, his girl. He and his girlfriend Genevieve have broken up. It's just post college, and he's heartbroken and wakes up um, in the night and just sort of can't settle down and decides to go down to the beach to watch the sun come up and be with his own misery. So he's um, right at the beach here where I'm going to start, and this is going to be about a 4-minute reading. The immensity of the ocean was already having an effect on him, diminishing the size of his problems, connecting him to everything elemental and all but eternal. He took off his shoes and socks, then stepped barefoot onto the cold sand, feeling a sense of liberation at his own insignificance, while also feeling, because he was alone, because it was dark, because the entire city lay behind him, asleep, a sense of himself as a sort of local god, surveying his domain under a cloak of invisibility and omnipotence, two sides of the same coin. He sat at the water's edge, the dry sand just above the high tide line, and the cold seeped through the seat of his pants. He could make out the horizon, splitting the view, the most distant visible thing on Earth. He fantasized about being dropped off out there, halfway to Japan, treading water, succumbing to exhaustion. He didn't know then that from his vantage, the seemingly infinite distant line was less than 2 nautical miles away. He was no better at estimating the dimensions of his heartbreak. With G, he'd felt like he was going somewhere, building a life, and now he felt like he'd been sent back to the starting line. As absurd as it would seem to him later and actually impossible to recreate in his memory, to recapture the intensity of it, G's absence from his life felt unrelenting and ever present, the first thing he thought of upon waking and the last thing he thought of before sleep descended. A glow simmered behind him, fiat lux, a slow reveal, coaxing sea and sky from the void. Another day begun. Pelicans skimmed the slick water. The hazy outline of a ship appeared in the channel. Nearby, seagulls squabbled over a piece of cellophane. High tide crests peaked but didn't break until they met the shore, ripples crossing the ocean from whatever storm had drummed them up. A rising of the water's energy passed from one molecule to another like a baton in a relay, transmitted all this way only to fizzle out on the sand. Just passing through, said a voice inside his head, source unknown. probably a bumper sticker. This happened
Mhm.
sometimes. A voice or a song appeared in his thoughts, unbidden but germane to whatever was going on in the moment, as if he didn't have one mind but many, and his consciousness worked more like an orchestra conductor than a generator of its own ideas. Out of the corner of his eye, he caught a dark form on the surface of the water. He was pretty sure it hadn't been there a moment before. A clump of kelp? No, a swimmer making for the shore, an arm slapping the water, then drifting, as if scanning the bottom, like a snorkeler without a snorkel, but then not. The swimmer undulated with the passing swell. The lack of muscle tension signaled to Jeff that something was wrong. He stood to watch, expecting the swimmer's arm to rise to slap the water again or his head to turn for a breath, but nothing happened. He went to flag a lifeguard, but the towers were shuttered. Up and down the beach, there was only a single woman jogging, too distant to take notice. He hadn't yet faced a moment like this in his life, one in which he knew, with certainty, that the crisis at hand was his alone to deal with, one during which he wished for the intercession of the God he didn't believe in, or anyone who might know what to do, or even someone as clueless and panicked as himself who could by their presence share the burden. It was one of those crucial moments, one which, when reflected on, wouldn't be laughed off but would send a chill up his spine, because even if he felt that he had no choice, that anyone would have done what he did in that situation, he would have to acknowledge that he was being tested, because in truth he could have given up, could have despaired, could have walked away, could have pretended he hadn't seen what he'd seen, could have subtracted himself from the scenario, told himself that he wasn't even there, that he'd left a moment too early or arrived a moment too late, that the predicament had not in fact fallen in his lap but only grazed him as it passed, undisturbed and unaddressed, left to unfold by itself, as nature might have intended. I pointed out that one's interceding or not could equally represent fate, that letting nature take its course could include any number of interventions, since we ourselves were inseparable from nature. He considered this for a moment, seemed about to reply, and sipped his beer instead. Yes, there
And
you go.
that's Antoine Wilson reading from mouth to mouth. And again, like you set it up, I mean, this is happening at the airport. They're talking, and you jump then into third person when Jeff Cook recounts that story, and this changes his life when he goes in and he rescues that person. That person turns out to be quite a wealthy, famous person in the art world, and then the arc of Jeff changes, and this is really interesting. I mean, Jeff is kind of like a I don't know, a very kind of passive guy,
Yeah.
right? Stuff just happens to
Yeah, he's a
him,
bit of
and
a doofus. He's just, straight out of college and doesn't quite. He's just, he's product of he grew up with a single mom in a somewhat uh, meager circumstances up in Santa Cruz. It's mentioned, and so yeah, he doesn't quite know what he's doing with his life, and I think being attached to his girlfriend, who was more ambitious and more savvy, possibly seemed to him like that would help him find his way forward.
again, what is really so cool about this book, how you accomplish to, I mean, there's just these layers because he then, as he presents himself in the airport lounge 20 years later as the successful guy, who is very, very focused, obviously,
Mm-hmm.
and rewarded with this success. It's so different, but here he tells the story again. He is the boss, he's the agent of how he wants to be perceived, and we have no idea to what extent it is actually made up.
Right, right.
Maybe he was always driven, or maybe he was never. Maybe he is, I don't know.
Yeah, well,
uh,
and I like to think that there's something in him that had had to find its way out. Um, that was reflected, in fact, in his relationship with Francis. I think one of the most interesting questions I was asked about this book when it was still in manuscript was my wife asked me, why? What does Chloe, which is who is Francis's daughter, who
And
Jeff ends up.
Francis is the art dealer with
Yes.
galleries all over the place, and he's wheeling and dealing, and very successful.
Yeah,
Um,
and but
yeah.
so Chloe and Jeff start dating, which is a bit of a spoiler, but not that big of a spoiler. And but what does Chloe see in Jeff? You know,
Mm.
but and my initial answer was, well, he's really good looking, and he is. He's a very handsome guy, which really helps him move through the world in a with a privilege that he is completely unaware of.
Hmm.
But the deeper answer that came to me, you know, on the stairs, so to speak, was that she sees in him what he doesn't even see in himself, which is a reflection of her father.
Oh man, that is
Yeah,
freaking deep, because I would have said something different, but that's totally, that is spot on.
yeah,
I actually thought that you were going to say that he is uh, different from her father, from her super controlling father. Like the first thing is like he is presenting freedom in the sense that he is not as laser focused on making money all the time.
yeah. I mean, yeah, they're very different um, people, but I think he has, yeah, sort of this potential thing in him. He doesn't. I don't imagine him, you know, in his gallery in 2010, behaving in the same way that Francis does at all. But in the ways the business works, maybe so.
Okay, we're going totally. This is always the dilemma, Antoine, for me, as the book club host, because
Mm,
in the back of my mind is, of course, okay, people haven't read the book, so when we're too inside baseball, but I also want to be totally inside baseball. But I'm going to read this little excerpt here, which I love, which is also another example of your prose, which I really love. This is, again, we're at the airport and the flights are delayed, which enables Jeff to tell his whole story, which is long. And they drinking the beer in the lounge, but here at one point the narrator goes to the front desk, and I think he checks in what's happening with his flight.
mm,
And this is such a short excerpt here of just really good writing. He talks about um, the airline employee who is uh, behind the front desk here, and who keeps telling people that, well, you're delayed. I think her name is Saskia.
yeah,
Her eyes betrayed a glimmer of amusement, a perverse delight at the vicissitudes of travel, the things which cannot be changed, the fates assigned to us by the same gods who abandoned us long ago. It was the spark we see in the eyes of the patrolman shutting down the snowy pass, the local who tells you that you can't get there from here, the mechanic who informs you that you're not going anywhere today. So that's just it's just really good. Now I'm wondering
it's
what
pretty
the
good stuff.
yeah, yeah, you should be, it
Yeah,
is.
that's
Uh,
fun. It's weird because you know you do.
How long does it take you
Uh,
to arrive at something like that, to kind of hone it down, to really kind of nail what you want to nail here, which is something that we all go through, and which gives the people who are sometimes maybe a little powerless, a lot of power, and I mean, deservedly, they should relish in it.
you know what's interesting about something like that? That particular line, I think I came across in, you know, in the process of first the first draft of that scene, you know, of that moment, which I may have written in a different form before. But so I had the sort of image or the, you know, that look in her eyes, and then that little idea, and then I had a sense of the rhythm of the way that the things get listed. But I think probably, you know, the first draft, the language, um, you know, probably had some more repeat words in it. You know, it may not have been as tight, and then I tightened up just the language on that.
Mhm. And when you
Yeah.
said you have like all these different drafts or different forms, are you talking about like an entire um different book, like from start to finish, or just little parts of it?
Yeah, usually from the start, not all the way to the end, because the problem is that's it's from the start until you know, my ship hits the rocks or the reef, and I need to go back to port and start over. So
Hmm.
um, I guess you'd call them false starts, but some of those false starts end up deeply incorporated in the final product, and um, they're more than starts. They take years.
What fascinates me now, I read a lot of literary and genre fiction past year, and many were against the backdrop of whatever you call it, late stage capitalism, playing out some
Mm-hmm.
sort of dystopian scenario, and human relationships mirroring this in the neoliberal framework. And your book is interestingly set in the art world, which arguably, and I thought about this, is one of the best examples to explain to an alien, let's say, what is wrong with this economic system. Like, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's just outrageous, the prices. We don't even have to talk about NFTs. There's actually a really great video on YouTube about how NFTs reflect the perversity of the high. We're talking about high end art market, but you built this whole story in mouth to mouth in a much deeper, and also um, it's like a much deeper intimate human drama. and
Mm-hmm.
and and the themes are there a little bit, the laser focus of Francis, the gallery owner, the ruthlessness, and all this kind of stuff. But I wonder if you ever had the plan, or if it occurred to you, yeah, I gotta have sort of the system critique underneath, or were you conscious of that everybody else is doing it? You say, like, F it, I'm gonna do sort of an intimate family drama.
I would say I'm not super conscious of everybody else doing that. Probably, I
Maybe
don't
it's
know.
just what I interpret when I read it, because it's all, and I'm not saying these are necessarily bad. I mean, it's something that people talk about all day long, how
Yeah,
capitalism is failing, the inequality and all this kind of stuff.
yeah. I tend to think in terms of the contemporary life and capitalism and economies. I tend to think mainly in terms of the um, uh, more general themes of uh, kind of empty salesmanship, the
Hmm.
function of art, the function of that high end art is not necessarily even to be seen as much as it is to um, uh, sometimes it's just part of someone's identity as a collector, to crow about what they've got, what they managed to get from somebody else, and sometimes it's a way to launder money or park assets. I didn't get into it too much because it wasn't really Jeff's central concern, but it's there in the backdrop.
What was You mentioned earlier that you worked in that world for a little bit.
Yeah.
What
So
capacity, and what have you seen?
well, it was funny.
I've seen things,
Yeah, I've
but
seen these things. I just right out of college, I was looking for work. I knew I had been pre med, but I had decided I'd taken the MCAT and done all that. But I decided I didn't really want to go to medical school. I wanted to be a novelist. So I decided I should get a job that has something to do with books. And if I'd been savvy at all, I would have gone to New York and interned at some publishing company or something. I didn't even know about MFA programs, or I didn't know about anything.
you sound a little bit like Jeff Cook describes himself in the book, sort of drifting.
These apples don't fall far from the tree.
Hmm. Aha.
Yes. So, um, but I saw on the job board this job that's it was fine art and rare book appraisal, and I was like, oh, books. So I went out and I got the job, and I worked for a fine art and rare book appraiser in Beverly Hills, which turned out to be, even having grown up from middle school on in Santa Monica, I had no idea what a freak show Beverly Hills is. It's
Mhm.
it's as freaky as Venice, but they don't know they're freaks. It's a very strange environment, and so I went to work there, and of course, like 95% of the work was fine art, not rare books, and had nothing to do with me being, a writer. But I got my education in art, mainly post-war and contemporary art, while working for the art appraiser. First as a transcriber or transcriptionist from the mini tapes that would she would record when she was inspecting work for jobs,
Mhm.
and then I don't know, just as a helper person. And you know, I would do a lot of editing of the reports and some inspection, help with inspections and things. But I ended up being sort of, you know, up to my neck in the world of contemporary art. And much of my education came from, besides the monographs that I obviously had to read if we're, you know, writing up a summary of why an artist is significant. Um, much of my education came from auction catalogs,
Hmm.
which is you know, a strange place to uh, learn about art and learn to appreciate art, because every one of them has an estimate, you know, a price tag attached to it. So I don't know. I always felt somewhat icky about the price, the attachment of the price tags to the art. But on the other hand, that's the reality of it also. So it
But
was
that's
interesting.
interesting because so the what you're saying that the fact that the price tag was, I mean, you would you were unable to see the art independent from the monetary value that somebody gave it, and that kind of skewed your perspective. That's kind of what happens in the
Maybe,
book too, in a
yeah,
way.
but right, but then there was also real appreciation. You know, I
Hmm.
mean, I was being exposed to it, and I was really looking at it, and I did wonder, why is some, you know, more expensive than others? Why are some considered more significant than others? Why isn't Joan Mitchell considered more significant in, you know, 1998 or whatever it was? Um, but so yeah, the price tags were there, but I also genuinely appreciated the art and learned a lot about it, the art and the artist. So it's, you know, I wouldn't say that seeing the commercial value of it skewed my appreciation. It just was sort of this dual channel thing. But I have had the experience of walking into a you know, a contemporary art museum and being excited. And what am I going to see in the museum? And
Hmm.
then I realize, oh, I'm going to see, you know, Franz Klein. I'm going to see Clifford Still. I'm going to see Helen Frankenthaler. I'm going to see all these, the big hitters of post-war art, and I'm just going to go check mark, check mark, check mark. They're all here, rather than, you know, really engaging with the art. If I'm feeling sort of, you know, like I haven't had uh, breakfast or coffee and I'm
Right.
feeling a little cynical, and I've had that experience. And in fact, I had that experience in New York once, and I just felt like it was all empty until I came around the corner and saw a big Jackson Pollock, and it and I'd never been a huge Pollock fan, but I had to sit down. It was just a sort of undeniably powerful aesthetic experience.
Yep.
Just knocked me on my ass. And
That's what Jackson Pollock did that to me too. The when
mhm,
I saw that, I understood. I mean, this is not about me, but I was in avant-garde circles when I was in the conservatory, and there was a lot of intersection with painters and stuff like that. But I always felt a little bit weird about abstract expressionism and action painting. And then I saw Jackson Pollock in a museum, and it's just it is really a transformative experience in
yeah,
that scale. And
it,
we will
it
find out who Joan Mitchell is, by the way, that you mentioned. It's important in the book because for the education of the main protagonist, Jeff Cook, Joan Mitchell is kind of important, kind of
yeah.
paralleling. You didn't take Jackson Pollock in the book; you took Joan Mitchell.
Well, I that Jackson Pollock experience was later. I did have that similar experience with the Joan Mitchell. I had already been a fan, and I had only seen her work in auction catalogs and in a monograph. And I came around a corner in maybe the National Gallery. I don't remember where I was, but came around the corner, and it didn't knock me on my ass, but I was. I looked at this particular Joan Mitchell painting, and it was as if somebody had just started playing music,
Hmm.
you know, in my head. Like, and that one, yeah, I just sat on the bench, and I was just so happy to be in front of it. To And it just had, yeah, it somehow conveyed an aesthetic energy that I really, really appreciated.
If you're just tuning in, this is the Second Life Book Club with Antoine Wilson. The book is Mouth to Mouth, and We exceeded the top of the hour, but as we've been doing as of late, we're rolling the exclusive VIP post stream game hangout into the main stream so
Hmm.
that people can keep watching, and then we'll close it out at the bottom of the hour. Paradise Quixote says, really terrific reading. Have the book queued up on Audible. Well,
Awesome.
Paradise, but it's not Antoine narrating as we established on the
No,
audiobook. Maybe
but I
Antoine.
think yeah, Eduardo's fantastic.
Really quick, when you say freaky as Venice, but they don't know they're freaks in Beverly Hills. For people who have never traversed LA County. My first job when I came over was delivering books. I
Hmm.
tell that story often. I was all over the county delivering books in Compton in the morning and then in Beverly Hills in the afternoon. And the Beverly Hills people thought, why is he still alive without a bulletproof vest? Um, what is freaky about this scene?
um, I don't know. I mean, I guess just on a superficial level, you if you go to Beverly Hills, you see the sort of visual representation of a value system um, that
Hmm.
that is wealth centered, that is excessive
It's
in
obscene.
in its details. It's obscene, but it's it's everything is turned up a little higher and similar to a niche nightclub scene. They believe that they're at the center, right, of
Hmm.
the universe. Um, so there's a certain cluelessness um, about it. It's yeah,
Hmm.
I don't know, and it's interesting because there are other wealthy parts of Los Angeles that do not sort of wear it on their sleeve in the same way.
Ah, that's an interesting point. Hmm.
Yeah, it's yeah, it's a cultural thing.
That is very true. Okay, so before we get too bogged down with dissecting that scene, um, let's see. Should we go over to the Joan Mitchell gallery and then do the reading over there?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Um, I have one question about a public space for
Yeah.
completion here. This is a literary magazine and also a publisher of independent books, a public space, and you are a contributing editor. What's this? Why do we need a literary magazine, Antoine? I mean, isn't there enough out there? Why are you doing this kind of stuff? What's the value here? Speaking about value system.
Well, uh, I mean, the value is publishing short work by all different kinds of incredible writers, but a public space is also made part of their focus uh, discovering uh, previously neglected writers,
Hmm.
like Betty Howland. Her memoir W3 is phenomenal, and yeah, and Public Space started publishing books a few years ago, and then also doing a sort of emerging writers program, um, which is I think a year-long mentorship with a more established writer, and some absolutely wonderful writers have come out of that, including Jay. I can't remember his last name. A Play for the End of the World is his book that just came out. Um,
Ah,
yeah, he had a short story in the magazine. Um,
I put up here a slide with a few covers here. God's Children Are Little Broken Things, story by Arinze Ifiakandu, and then the magazine. Is that a print magazine in the
it
physical
is.
form?
Yeah, it is.
Oh,
And
that's awesome.
yeah, the other thing that's cool about it is there's typically some interesting art or some crossover between art and text. And it's also a magazine that I think, without going off the avant garde um, diving board, does publish a lot of things that are formally interesting and not just the sort of run of the mill. So, other voices, other forms, maybe.
When we did the pre-show meeting, when you're talking about other forms, uh, I have to look this up. Shyla, the researcher, give me a quote of yours where you are essentially saying that you didn't know um, style. I guess I'm paraphrasing here, and that you need to actually know style and basically you need to know some craft. You can't just start writing thinking I read this stuff and then I write it. You need to have some form, and this stuff is not mutually exclusive. But you just mentioned we mentioned avant-garde a little bit earlier. What's your take on the the form, the established form of a narrative, the kind of points? I mean, y- your wife is a screenwriter as well, and they have to hit certain points much more than writers do. But I guess
Mhm.
writers do that too. So is that something where you feel confined sometimes, and you want to be more experimental, or is maybe a public space a place where you can sort of live that out and then do the novels in it? And I don't want to call it traditional, but but a more I don't know, like a good meal, but it's a meal that has follows a certain form.
Yeah. Um, I think I'm definitely drawn to reading some experimental writers. I would draw a distinction between experimental and avant-garde, maybe,
Mm-hmm.
um, because the experimental writers that I like to read um, aren't necessarily doing these experiments for the sake of, shattering the old forms. Um, they are usually attempting to find a form that works for some kind of underlying material, um,
Mm-hmm.
and the conventional forms are not cutting it, so they kind of cut uh, their own paths through the woods. And I'm not talking about way off the deep end, but just somebody uh, that comes to mind. Well, Thomas Bernhard. Um,
Ah, standing right
He's
here in my
an
physical place. Yeah.
extremist. And I read a novel by a French writer whose name is escaping me at the moment. I think it was called "Why I Have Not Written Any of My Books." Um, yeah, and it's
That's an
just,
amazing title.
oh, I know. And then Enrique Villamatas, um, Bartleby and Company is a
Mm-hmm.
fantastic uh, novel, and he tends. I mean, he some of these writers tend to sort of hew toward the intellect rather than the emotion end of things. Um, and I don't know. I like new forms if they're working for me.
I mean, this is kind of an obvious. I think we agree that when you do something, uh, I don't know, to alienate people for alienation's sake,
Yeah.
that gets old pretty fast.
Mm-hmm.
But if you, like you said, that you put this really well, if you work in a quote unquote traditional form and it's not working, you need to find your own form to get that story out. I
Yeah.
guess that's the essence of it.
Yeah. And I mean, I think about it in terms of analogies. To music. Uh, you might have some things that are sort of harder to listen to, or more loose than would ever be on the radio,
Hmm.
on the pop radio or something, because people are playing around and finding new forms, but they're not just you know doing Metal Music Machine to say "fu" to all the other forms.
That has a validity too, I have
I
to say.
agree, I agree, but
Sometimes.
it's just not. Yeah, it's not. It does wear thin, or it can wear thin very quickly.
Well, I get into this discussion with my dad all the time because I love modern classical. I study classical, and
Mm,
my parents were just, they just love the romantic
hmm.
period, nonstop from morning to evening, something that is just soothing. And I found it when I started studying. I found that stuff so incredibly boring, and then I just hit them over the head with Lutoslavsky, where the cellos are just like scratching against the surface. So it was a little bit rebellious, but I still find this material that just works with noise, really cool. And there's so many different strands in 20th century after 12 tone music. Okay, because before I get completely off the rails talking about contemporary composition, let's all stand up because this is now the very special. We're going to go over to the gallery. Let's go over to the gallery. We have 14 minutes left in the program. Oops, there is something that is preventing us from walking here. I think
Oh
there's an
yeah.
invisible wall. Oh
Now
my God. It
talk about
boxed us
mine.
in.
Talk about
But
Minecraft.
we'll talk
There
about
we go.
Minecraft, but also talk about being boxed into a format.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, my
So
daughter creates invisible walls in Minecraft to keep her animals from falling out of her high buildings.
tell your daughter that we had to build this invisible wall, and we're going, by the way, to the Francis Arsenault Fine Arts grand opening right now. Please follow us. Francis Arsenault is the character in Antoine's book. Tell your daughter that we had to build this wall so that you don't fall off stage when you're reading while you were reading.
Oh yeah, but we didn't have a riser today, so that's why it was so strange.
Well, yeah, but you could have run into the audience and just bumped into them.
True,
That
true.
would have been so.
And
Yeah,
we should
go
warn
ahead.
people if you do go upstairs in the gallery where there are more paintings, don't walk toward the picture of the airport or you'll teleport to the street again. I made that mistake earlier. It's very
Actually,
disorienting.
Actually, you might find this incredibly funny. I'm just looking over to the YouTube stream,
Hmm.
and our camera person, Isabel, fell off the roof just now. So
Oh,
the YouTube folks, if you are seeing seeing somebody bumbling over, it's Isabel. She just fell through the roof, and she just came she just came back. But so here's the gallery, and let me see. I brought my book stand. I'm putting the book stand out. And this is talk a little bit about Joan Mitchell. Joan Mitchell is was an artist, and her work basically transforms
yeah,
the
she.
protagonist in the book, I guess, or his outlook on art. That art can be aesthetic. There is a difference in uh, aesthetics and craft and just craft and anyways.
Yeah, I mean, his attitude toward the art at the beginning of the book, having had no exposure to it.
Yeah, he looks at the price tags. He goes like, "What
He
the
looks at
hell is going
right. He's
on?
like,
This is
these
this."
can't be in dollars, right? And also he's looking at it. And he's like, a kid could have made this, right? Like that's a fairly common response to some kinds of contemporary art,
Yeah,
and I
my
don't think it's a
two-year-old does stuff like that all the time. My
yeah,
three-year-old.
and I don't think it's a I don't think it's an illegitimate response. It's a real response, but it's also sort of an uneducated response and one that he hasn't really had a chance to look much. So in this scene, he's walked with Francis down to Sotheby's down the street, and they're checking on one of Francis's artist's paintings. But Jeff ends up in a room. Francis has gone off to chase down Mick Jagger, who was walking through the back rooms of Sotheby's.
Oh my God, we spoiled that Mick Jagger's in the book. Now people are gonna
I
buy it.
know that's a true detail though. That's why I brought it up. I
What?
saw Mick
Whoa,
Jagger.
wait. You did when you worked
Yeah,
in that?
I
Yeah.
saw him back there at Sotheby. He came in to look at some stuff before the auction, and he just went walking by, and I was like, "Holy cow! There's Mick Jagger." Um, anyway, so this Jeff is left alone with some of the paintings in the preview room, and this is the Joan Mitchell, and this is a fairly short little reading here. A large painting across the room caught his eye, leaning against the wall, a diptych. He was drawn in not only by its monumental scale, but also by its complexity, its energy, its dynamics, and its seemingly unresolved and unresolvable nature. He didn't look at it so much as watch it. He let his eyes move across the surface, taking in the strokes of dark brown, blue, yellow, orange, lavender, and white, the spots, the drips, the forceful gestures, the accidents, the way the seam between the two panels bisected the floating cloud or blob or explosion, so that it looked as if the left side and right side were painted at different times, from different vantage points, the lines not quite connecting, the right side magnified and shifted up about a foot. The canvases almost connected, and in distribution of color and gesture, the overall image was almost symmetrical, so that if he thought about it, which he did not until later, much later, part of the painting's overall dynamic mimicked what happens when our eyes cross or are affected by different lenses or are in some way uncoupled from each other. Double vision, a parallax view, an image refusing to resolve into a single perspective. He would look back on this moment many times and feel the same fluttering in his chest he felt upon first encountering this work, and no matter how he tried to reduce his response to logic or reason, he would always fail. Only after he'd stood there for who knew how long did he think to read the label to find out who had made the painting. Joan Mitchell, painted in 1986. Both the plainness of the name and the recent date didn't fit for him the idea of artistic genius, which was, he had been taught, always foreign and always old. The estimate seemed too low for such a profound work, at least compared to the numbers he'd come into contact while working at FAFA. Though, when he thought about it in the context of real world funds, the low estimate comprised 10 years of his earnings. And yet, even while that seemed ridiculous, it still seemed to him too low. In the distance between these values, he felt himself recalibrating, and in the field of energy created by the painting, he felt intimations of an I of his own.
Mm.
Francis entered the gallery, vibrating with energy after his encounter with Mick Jagger. He sidled up next to Jeff, who hadn't taken his eyes off the painting. "Woof," Francis said.
What
Then
does
we
that
cut we
mean,
cut
Wolf?
back to the air. Well, we'll see. I'm going to
Oh, sorry,
read a little
you
bit from the
keep
next
going.
chapter. So yeah,
Oh,
he
yeah.
says, "Woof." He didn't care for it, I asked. Jeff nodded. But it was my first encounter with the sublime in a work of art. Jeff pronounced the word sublime with eyes shut reverence. I asked him what he didn't like about it, and all he said was second gen Abex, which meant nothing to me, but which I assumed correctly meant that his woofing had to do with the soft market for the piece. The funny thing is, if I'd had the funds back then, and if I'd gone with my eye, my gut, whatever, I could have sold it later for 10 times what I'd paid. You see, I did have good instincts. I just didn't know it yet. How quickly he moved from the aesthetic to the mercantile.
And I love that you included that sentence because this is what I was going to ask earlier, how quickly he moved from the aesthetic to the mercantile.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's also in the subtext all the time here, and then especially with the writer. Can you move from the aesthetic to the mercantile? Where are you situated? Because actually, let's go upstairs. Shyla pulled two quotes from you about the business in terms of dealing with agents and stuff like that.
Oh wow!
And
So I'm gonna.
yeah,
I feel like it's. Am I coming upstairs to look at these quotes?
yeah. Please come upstairs. This upstairs is the quote section here. Look at this. This is
Antoine
where
Wilson, this is your life.
this is like this new Nicolas Cage movie where he is. It's all about Nicolas Cage, which is kind of a version of the John Malkovich movie. But I
Oh,
digress. Now, this is a different quote here first, where you say, I was aware of the autobiographical elements, but they came in sort of like, you think of it like lemon zest. The lemon is
oh
my
yeah.
life, and just the zest a little off, and then things take off from there. So I have no trouble using bits and pieces of life and the things around me to go into novels, but then I feel the total freedom of fiction. I mean, we established that a lot of the stuff here is autobiographical. When
Mm-hmm.
you go back to your previous novels, is there a lot of autobiographical stuff in Panorama City?
Yeah, but it's
Yeah.
lemon zest. My yeah my there's an old Philip Roth quote where he talks about that your writing really won't live unless you use some of the personal ingredient, but too much personal ingredient and you'll disappear right up your own asshole. So for me, it's just I feel like
Is
my
your wife then again the test reader who says like, okay,
yeah,
this is too
right.
much asshole
Don't
right there,
share this. Right. Don't share this. No, but
oversharing?
it's actually, I feel like the disappearing up your own asshole has more to do with being confused as a writer
Hmm.
and ending up in a sort of formless thing because you get drawn by autobiographical elements. They act like kind of magnets and they take you away from, unless you're writing a memoir, they take you away from the needs of the material that's on the page. It can get very confusing. Um,
Hmm.
but I just draw from memory in the same way that I draw from imagination. I don't consider myself to have like a particularly good or powerful imagination, other than a sort of remixer of memory, maybe. Um, so that's and then
Mixer, it's really
to
the
joke.
I see what you're saying. Like you're the master mixer, which
Yes,
gets the recipe right. Mhm.
yeah, and in terms of the my lemon zest quote at the end of it is that you zest off some lemon, and then eventually you got this pile of lemon zest, and you squeeze it and try to make convince people it's also a new lemon.
Ah,
That's what the novel is a new lemon made out of lemon zest.
oh my God, that's good. These quotes are,
Thank
I
you.
think, from a podcast interview that Shiloh was listening to. And here's the one about selling, because Antoine, this is sometimes a little unsatisfactory to me. We have a lot of authors, and I know they don't want to go into that detail, but sometimes I ask, how is it, or people in the audience ask the process of getting an agent and that kind of thing. And
Hmm.
often our guests just say, well, you got to choose if you're going the indie route, indie publishing, or if you have an agent. And I was like, but it's not that easy. You don't pick up the phone and say, okay, I chose agent. You got to get their attention. You got to get that phone number. You got to get on their radar.
Hmm.
The kind of rejection I feel sometimes authors are maybe, well, they're hesitant to talk about the rejection.
I
Do you,
think
do you want to talk
rejection
about
is,
rejection a
yeah.
little bit?
I don't remember saying
We have
this quote.
three
That's
minutes left.
interesting.
This
Um,
quote, it's funny. Let me read it. It's
no,
funny. I
I can
always
see it. Yeah.
Yeah, but
Oh, man.
people might just listen to
Right.
it later without the visuals. I approach everything like a radio guy. I'm sorry,
No,
Antoine.
no, good idea.
It's funny. It always gets summarized. Oh yeah, and then I ended up getting an agent, and then we ended up selling the book. But yeah, there's just this totally crazy rocky road until you get there. You just have to roll with it and have faith. And when you lose faith, you have to lean on your friends. But that's what I mean. This is what I'm always sort of getting at. But I want I think because this gives hope to people who are starting out, that I firmly believe that when you tell people how hard it is, it's better for people. I
Yeah.
don't know. That's
Well,
just
and
me.
you mentioned rejection, and rejection really is awful, but almost as awful as rejection is submission. And just waiting, having to wait, and sort of
Mm,
having to put, maybe you have a book that you want to get out into the world, and you've sent out your query letters and agents have asked for the manuscript, and then you're waiting. You don't know where you are on their pile. The agents always have the pile of their clients that are first, and
right.
then they're, who they might be reading, to take on as new clients. And you're just waiting. It can often feel like you're just stuck in park, in a way that even makes it difficult to generate new work or distract yourself.
That is the
So
most paralyzing thing,
yeah,
absolutely. And so they don't give you an estimate or anything like an email, hey, I'll get back to you in like 3 weeks or whatever. This is something that I'm super conscious of with everybody that I work with, that I'm trying to give them realistic expectations, or at least express, hey, I'm very busy, but please, if you don't hear from me, uh, holler, harass me. Don't feel like bad if you shower me with emails. I find that just in a person to person interaction, regardless of what it is, really, really important.
yeah. Um,
Mm.
but agents are really busy, and
Yeah.
some of them that you might want X agent because they represent a writer that you love. That agent might not really be dying for a new client, but they might say, okay, I'll take a look, and maybe their assistant is going to read it or whatever. So it's, not an agent's primary job, once they have a solid list, to be looking for, or catering to the feelings of potential new clients,
Oh,
right?
no, no, no. I completely
Yeah,
understand, Antoine. But then, okay, but then I gotta say,
but that's
okay,
what makes
what?
it hard on the submitter's end, because you really do feel like you're at the gates, like n- knocking, and it's
Okay, but then maybe you have to knock a little bit lower on the ladder. Here's
mhm.
another symbol that you use in the book, the ladder. I mean, why do you shoot that high then to this superstar agent?
um, Well, I would say not necessarily the superstar agent, because yeah, those people, they'll just tell you, thanks, I'm not reading. But shoot for the agent who represents the work that you admire and whose work yours might be similar to. I think is a
Hmm.
good strategy, um, but it's also not a bad idea to shoot for an agent who's hungry
Hmm.
to begin with, because they are out there too, and they are actively looking.
I think that's pretty good advice. That's kind of what I mean. If you go for someone hungry and you start with them, if you're starting out, you find somebody as hungry as you, and you both start out together, and you both rise on the ladder. And I'm not going to bore people with the ladder quote, which I also have here. We're so prepared. Okay, so we're going to wrap it because we're very mindful of people's time, and Antoine has been very generous. Let me just say that Kitten Duo, thank you for the super chat. Kitten is a big fan, and Kitten, come on in, world. She's watching on YouTube. Kitten says, "Thank you, Drax, for bringing this to us every week. My pleasure. As an obsessive reader, this is just amazing to discover new authors and share them with this wonderful crowd. Thank you, Antoine. Congratulations again to a
Thank you.
wonderful book. See you in 5 years.
Ha ha. Yes,
Please, people, laugh.
I
Where's my
hope.
laugh track? Hello.
Right, right. Oh my gosh, 5 years would be good. I'd take that.
It'll,
It's been delightful. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you everybody for coming to listen and represent. Much appreciated.
I highly recommend also The Interloper and Panorama City. Start with this one and then work yourself back. Uh, Thanks to the audience, book club members, viewers on YouTube, viewers on Twitter. Please like and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Consider a membership. We now have memberships. We have Drax Fan, Drax Bro, and Drax Stan. Um, my agent is thinking about adding a Drax Sis um, level of membership. Now, next week we have, where is the next week slide? We have Damon A. Young next week. Damon A. Young was on the program before. This is at 10 p.m. 10 p.m. Please take a note. 10 p.m. Second Life time, which is Pacific time. It's a different time slot because Damon is in Australia. Damon is a philosopher, and he wrote a book called On Getting Off: Sex and Philosophy. So that's going to be an interesting one. Got very good reviews, that book. I haven't read it yet. I will start tomorrow morning. And yeah, the show is produced by Shyla the Super Gecko, Isabel Sharon, and myself. Let's just run through the credit slides real quick. The email is slbookclub@draxter.com. If you have recommendations, if you have critique, please don't hesitate and let us know if there's an author you want to see on the show. Show is booked tightly, but there are a few openings in in later this year in the fall. The location manager master builder is Ruby Geek. Ruby built this whole entire thing, also
Thank you,
based on
Ruby.
stuff. Ruby is the greatest. Where is she? Is she here on camera? Can we put the camera on her? Ruby's also a writer. Ruby is a multi-talented person. Here she is over there. And oh, we have Annalise Avery here. Oh my God, Annalise Avery is an author, a published author, and she is coming to the book club. I forgot. Maybe it's May. We'll see. Please befriend each other if you want, and if you get a friend request. I should say this every week. If you get a friend request and you feel uncomfortable responding to it in the affirmative, there is no obligation to reciprocate, right? I mean, this is a cultural norm here in Second Life and in other virtual worlds as well. But I would encourage you. Sherkin says give people a calling card. That is actually great. That's a more subtle way. It's a substitute for friending, and then people can follow up with friending. That's a great idea. Um, avatars are made by Ruby. Research by Shyla. We have a lot of sponsors where we get their products for free. This whole set featured a lot of stuff by Bad Unicorn. Bad Unicorn is an amazing Second Life builder. The other sponsors include Bespoke, Blueberry, Headhunters Island Creatures, Crescendo Landscapes Unlimited, Linden Lab, of course, Nomad, Rag VR, Salt and Pepper, Slink, Skin Stealer, The Black Forest, What next? There is a tip jar. Oh, Ruby, put out the tip jar here. God damn it, the tip jar is in the other location. I forgot that we end the show here. Please do tip the volunteer staff. I think Ruby can put a tip jar out real quick. If not, there is one on the other end. Here we go. We got the tip jar. Again, slbookclub at dragster.com for recommendations and critique and so on and so forth. And Damon A. Young with On Getting Off Sex and Philosophy is coming next week, right here to the Second Life Book Club at 10 p.m. Goodbye.